started looking first at what some of these kanji mean. Okay. And then we're going to talk in more detail about things like stroke order and more of the kanji. So, nobody got this one? It's awfully close to age, yeah. Sai is written just slightly differently usually. Usually the stroke comes from this direction. This one is up this way. But this one is actually one of the, like, side by side with the main version of itself. Does anyone know which of these this corresponds to? I believe it shows in your packet. If I can borrow somebody's packet, I will take a peek and see if it showed up. Yep, it showed up, and can you see it now? Yep. So this is hand, right? This is also hand. And you're going, huh? Right? But what's the difference? The difference is this tet stands alone as the word for hand. This piece stands on the side like a character like that. Okay, so when hand is the whole word, like tet, hand, like in karak tet, empty hand, then you write this one. When it's a component, just one piece of the character, not the whole character, the form it normally takes is this one, especially if it's to one side of the character and it's the full height but only a fraction of the width of the whole character. That's the format it normally takes. There are a few occasions where you will see this form within a character, but it's usually like a short piece under something else rather than the full-length side. See what I'm saying? So both of them mean hand, but this means hand when it stands alone. This one doesn't exist as a standalone character, it exists as a component. Is everybody following me so far? Okay. There are a number of them that function both ways, but some of them change form fairly drastically, like this one does. Some of them, like sun, just get skinnier or fatter depending on where they're located in the character. So for example, there's a character that is like that, where it gets broader, and then there are characters like this, where it gets narrower. But it's still essentially the same character for sun, and it still has that basic meaning, but in some contexts it doesn't necessarily mean that that character is about the sun. So for example, in this character, the mouth is probably your meaning clue. These two are more probably about pronunciation, at least historically. A lot of times the pronunciation clues aren't much help anymore in modern Japanese, but every once in a while you've got a lucky one where it actually does help you remember the pronunciation. But the meaning cues are still fairly consistently helpful because the meanings of the characters haven't drifted as far from their original meanings, but the pronunciations have often drifted very far. Okay? So most of the time, sun will have to do with either something to do with brightness or something to do with telling time, day or date kinds of information. And it occurs in a lot of different words that have to do with telling time or days and dates. For example, this character has to do with days of the week. That's part of telling time, right? So sun is part of that because of the meaning, whereas this one, I'm not sure why sun is in there twice, but it's not really because of meaning, because that's a Chinese character that means to sing, and it's not even the one that's normally used most frequently in Japanese. It's more used in Chinese. So this means person. Okay. And does anyone see another piece that does for this what this does for that? There you go. Yep. The one that looks like katakana I also means person. Okay. Moon, again, it has to do not only with things relating to the moon, it's also a lot of times a component in relation to anything to do with months or duration of time that has relation to months. And this is kind of a weird one, but this character means meat, and somewhere along the way somebody simplified this down to that, and so this moon radical shows up in a lot of body part terminology, words having to do with muscles and body structures, and words like chest, because this two people components got transformed somewhere along the way into just two lines across. So, and again, this one is one that you don't normally see it change its overall look that drastically, but you will see it occur scrawnier, skinnier when it's one side of a character, and a little bit broader, a little bit fuller looking when it's a standalone character. Classic example of this one, both pieces have to do with meaning in this case. You take sunlight and moonlight, add them together, and you get bright, brightness. Okay? And then by extension, if you're an optimist, bright future. So this is also in the word for tomorrow. You know, and for a mnemonic, I always think about the sun will come out tomorrow. You know. So that actually means bright, and it also means tomorrow in Japanese. It's part of the word for tomorrow. Okay, so moon has all kinds of uses. Okay, here we have not up, that's close. Up actually looks like this.
It's earth.
Yeah, this one is earth, or soil. Okay, this one is up. See how there's a slight difference? Okay, so that little bit of a difference, this line does not cut through, this line does, can make a huge difference in meaning. So you have to be careful with your kanji, that you're writing the correct piece, right? You can't get sloppy when you're crossing this. You have to make sure you're either doing it halfway or the full size, depending on which one you mean, right? So this one means earth or soil, and it's again composed, it's a component of a lot of characters that have to do with earth and soil and growing things. It also it's also a component in things that have to do with things made out of soil, such as ceramics. Okay, and up, of course, is used for literal up, and then it also sometimes shows up as a component in other characters. Okay, anyone figure this one out? Inch, yes, which does not mean a literal inch in terms of like Western English measures, because this is a Chinese symbol, right? It came from ancient China, but it's the ancient Chinese equivalent that was probably somewhere close to the size of an inch or a centimeter or something. It was a short length of measure, right? And it looks a little bit like a protractor or something, like something you would use to measure inches with, right? So that's how I remember that one. much like a horse anymore, but this did evolve from a drawing of a horse.
Like you see the little legs.
Yeah, these are supposed to represent the hooves, I think.
Oh.
This is supposed to be the tail,
Oh, I thought it was like
and
eating
I think
grass.
this is supposed to be the mane.
Okay, no, I see
Yeah.
like eating grass in the field kind of.
Oh, okay, you
The
see it
head's
like a
down.
different shape. Okay, like the head down eating the grass. Okay. Whatever you see is fine, but yeah, it evolved from a picture of a horse running and the mane flowing out behind it. And it doesn't look like that anymore. But, you know, the original renderings of some of these ancient characters, one of the reasons they changed so drastically is they were hard to draw. If you weren't an artist, you would have a hard time drawing them. And don't forget that some of the earliest Chinese writings were carved into pieces of bone or tortoise shell or into stone, a little bit later into bronze. But if you're carving stuff, you can't have a whole lot of flowy artistic lines. It's hard to carve. So that's one of the reasons that the lines over time changed shape and became a little bit more simplified. And then eventually they invented paper and ink, and by that time things had already changed fairly drastically and they weren't going back to the old artistic characters anymore. Okay, so we talked about hand, knife, and power. And notice the relationship between them. You know, you've got knife. If you have a knife, extend it up a little bit, you've got power. You know, kind of makes sense, right? And I don't know if your packet shows it or not, I don't remember, but did you see that version of knife in your packet?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that is another version, which actually looks like the blade part of a knife, right? And again, this version you will see on the side of a character more likely, whereas this sometimes is a standalone piece and sometimes it shows up as like the bottom or the top of something. Same thing with power, it often shows up as the top or the bottom of something. So for example, that character represents a knife that just cut that line. See how the line's broken and the knife is there that did it? And it means to separate or to divide things. Interesting, huh? And by extension, if you're dividing things, you're separating things in an abstract sense, maybe you're comprehending them better. It's also the kanji for wakarimasu, to understand. Isn't that interesting? They've made that conceptual leap from physically cutting something to parsing something and understanding it. Isn't that interesting?
That kind of looks like a minute.
It is minute also, and you're dividing time.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this one, when it's pronounced as fun, it's time. Ipun, nihun, sanpun, yonpun, like that. It's minutes. You're dividing time up into minutes. When you're talking about wakaru, wakarimasen, it's that kanji also. And when you're talking about things that are divided up into very tiny components, things like flour that's ground out of wheat or rice to make bread, they call that with this kanji too. Like wheat powder, basically. That's what they call flour. And even kafun, pollen, flower pollen. Again, it's that kanji because it's teeny tiny little bits of things. So you cut something, you divide it, you make it into smaller pieces, and then by extension it came to mean very, homakai is another word, tiny detailed things in Japanese. So it gets used for all kinds of stuff. Different pronunciations, different readings for all those different uses of the word. But it gets used a whole bunch of ways. Isn't that interesting?
Mm-hmm.
So power gets used in a lot of ways. Field, has anybody ever seen rice fields? Like pictures of them even? If you see an aerial view, they kind of look like that. They're not always square, but there are these divisions between them because each one needs to be level within itself, fairly level, so that all the rice plants get equal amounts of water when it's time to flood the fields, and they all get equally dry when it's time to let the water drain out. And so they built these sort of mini dams around the fields, and the irrigation system in and out of each field that would allow them to control how much water was in each field. And that's why rice paddies are built the way they're built. They have to be level so that you can control the water levels. Because if one end of the field was higher than the other, the high end would be too dry and the low end would be too wet, and you wouldn't have good rice. So fields have that sort of a shape. And then one of the interesting compound characters, you put your rice field together with power. It means man, yeah. Because the men had to be strong and powerful to work in the rice fields. Or maybe it meant that the man who had lots of rice fields had power because he had economic strength if he had lots of rice fields. So I'm not sure which origin is true for that one. You can think of it a couple of different ways. But that's an example of two kanji being combined and both meanings being incorporated into the meaning of the whole. And kanji fall into several categories. Some of them are like this, or like bright, where both components contribute to the meaning of the whole. And some others are more like this yo from Doyobi, Days of the Week. One component has to do with meaning. The other side of it probably had to do with pronunciation historically, but we'll never know for sure because some of these, the pronunciation from ancient Chinese is lost to time. We just don't know what it used to sound like or what other character it looked like that sounded that way first, and they just took that existing character and tacked one other piece onto it to make it sound like that. So for example, this horse in Mandarin, they use this same character for horse, and they also use it for a bunch of other things that are homophones with the word for horse, and they just add another little piece or two to give it a different meaning. But they all sound basically the same as horse. So that happens somewhat in Japanese too. It's just not as clear cut because, like I said, most of these characters were adopted from Chinese into Japanese in what, the 500s, 600s, and 700s AD. And since then, the languages have drifted apart, and the pronunciation in Japanese and the pronunciation in Mandarin are not necessarily similar anymore. And whatever character they were drawing their pronunciation cue from may not be pronounced the same anymore either. So they might have started out as having a common pronunciation, but neither one is the same as what it used to be, so they don't sound alike anymore. And that's true for most of the characters in Japanese, unfortunately. So you don't get a lot of homophone help with Japanese. Okay, this one is woman. Yes, and this is another example of a character that came from a picture. They basically started out with a picture of a Chinese woman kneeling in a traditional dress with her arms in her sleeves. And I think, and I'm terrible at drawing it, but I think it looked something like that a long time ago. And so you see her head, her feet in a kneeling posture, and her arms like that, and somehow that involved into that. So you can look it up online if you want to see the evolutions. There are some really cool websites out there that show like flash animations of the evolution of the character, where it shows the ancient form, and then it shows it morphing into the other forms until you get to the modern version. So, okay, so we talked about person. This is the kind of person that shows up on the side of a character as opposed to being the whole character. The other person radical sometimes shows up as the top of something, you know, where it might have something underneath. And this is still considered to be the person radical, even though it's changed shape somewhat. It doesn't have this piece sticking up so far anymore, but it's still considered to be the person radical. Big looks like you took person, right, and held the arms out. It's this big, right? How many little kids have explained something that was huge from their perspective by saying, yeah, what's this big, right? Apparently Chinese kids did it too, because that's where they got the character big from. Okay, sunset, which if you look at the shape of the sun, and then you picture it going down behind maybe a hill, there you go, sunset. Make sense? Here, the part of the sun is already obscured by the hill that's blocking it. This one, anybody? Work, yes, work or labor. Not sure where its origins are really from, but personally I think it looks like a cross-section of one of those I-beams they use in modern construction. You know, those big concrete things. So that's how I remember it, because it looks like a piece of a construction site or something, or an anvil maybe. Okay, mouth, and yes, it originally started out looking more like that, but it evolved and changed shape, and now it looks more like the person is shouting instead of smiling. But that's mouth. Small, yes. And this one is either right hand or again. And how that came to be right hand, I'm not really sure. Maybe they were making a fist. I'm not sure about that one, but it also sometimes means again. And it often gets used for the again meaning. But sometimes the right hand meaning might be more relevant to a particular kanji. So it's good to know both of the meanings for that one. It also helps that it looks an awful lot like katakana nu, right? So you can always use that if nothing else. If you see a kanji component that looks like a katakana to you, you can use that to help you memorize it, even if you don't know what that component actually means.
It's like that. Labor is like that.
Hmm?
Labor looks like that.
Labor looks like ek, right, and the person one looks like i. The kuchi looks like ro, yeah. Sunset looks like ta. Yeah, some of the
Power
others.
looks like ka.
Yeah, power looks like ka.
And hand, that hand looks like o.
Oh, yeah, the other hand looks like katakana o, sort of, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so, any questions about components in general? Now, in your packets, some of them, can I borrow this for a sec? Some of them show two versions, the two versions that we talked about. Some of them show a third thing. Let me find one of the ones that shows three. Here. When it shows three, that third one is simplified Chinese, so you don't need to worry about it. Okay, just keep practicing the other two. Okay, because this form of fine silk and the second form of fine silk both do occur in Japanese. That third version of fine silk just doesn't show up in Japanese. It shows up in mainland Chinese where they use simplified. Okay, so you might want to just like take your pen and put a line through that piece so that you're not confused.
I didn't get.
It's a download. I'll have to help you get hold of it later.
Okay.
Okay. So, any other questions about radicals in general? So I wanted us to go ahead and actually run through what the radicals mean. I made flashcards for them. Okay, so what have we got here? Person. And this is knife.
Power. Right hand again.
Right hand or again, yes. Notice the structure looks a little bit different handwritten versus typed. They extended this line and they didn't leave any gap here. You don't have to leave a gap here. Some people write it full, but this line is kind of just a font style. You know, usually people don't write it extended like that. Mouth, and here again, these don't normally extend. That's just a font style. Okay. Speech, yes. And again, same thing with the mouth. And if you think about it, it's like these are the words coming out of the mouth, right? Or you could think of it as like the vapor that comes out of your mouth on a cold day when you start talking. You know, those of you who've been up north and know what that feels like. Some people have lived in Florida their whole lives and haven't had that experience.
Shell?
A shell, yes. Yeah. This represents like a cowrie shell. Has anybody seen shells that look sort of like this? No, not really?
It's like a little crab with like the little things.
Yeah. I think the shell they're talking about is the kind that's shaped sort of like this, with like lines inside, and some of them have like a little bit of a thing down at the bottom. Yeah, the other one that it could come from, perhaps, would be that kind of a shell, and it just kind of got squeezed until it's narrower. I'm not sure which one it's really from, but yeah. And this shell piece is actually part of some characters that have to do with commerce, buying and selling, because shells were a currency in ancient prehistoric times. You know, before people invented money, shells were trade goods, and people on the coast would trade their shells for things from the inland areas.
So if you lived on the beach, you were rich?
Yeah, if you lived on the beach, you were rich. Hmm? Yes, this means to walk or run. In modern Japanese, this is the character for run. In modern Mandarin, it's the character for walk. But if you look at it, you've got this soil piece on top, which is kind of an interesting place for it when you consider that this bottom piece is a foot. This piece, you can kind of see the bones of like the foot and the ankle a little bit. You see that a little bit?
Wait, so
It's
what's
a very
below soil? Not
Yeah, the bottom half, this half is the foot part, and this top half is soil. So it's kind of a weird order for them to put the foot below the soil instead of the foot on top of the soil, but that's the way it turned out.
yeah.
You would think the foot should be on the soil for walk or run, right? But it's the
Could be more on the
reverse.
sidewalk, and like that's the garden or something next to them.
Okay, yeah, if you want to think about it that way, yeah. So, makes more sense than the foot being buried under the soil when you're supposed to be trying to walk or run. Okay. This, it seems like mouth, but we already had mouth. Do you know what the other option is when you've got the second box, the larger box? This is a box that can contain something.
Is that six?
Hmm? Enclose, yes. Enclosure, as in border, as in country, for example.
Jail.
Jail, map. There are lots of words that include a piece inside of this box. And it doesn't mean mouth when it's got something inside of it. Instead, it means some sort of enclosure. So the word for country, for example, because you've got a border around the outside. The word for, what was I gonna, for map, because map shows, you know, a border and then something inside of it. Part of the word for park, because a park has a boundary. So this one, of course, is soil. We're just talking about that. Sunset. That. Big. Woman.
Child.
This one is child. Yes.
Inch.
Inch.
Small.
Small.
Labor.
Labor.
Silk.
No, this is like 1/2 of silk, but what is it when it's by itself? Anybody remember? It means tiny or small. So we've got two different characters that mean small, right? We've got the other one that means small, and we've got this one that means small. Yeah, the font is a little bit weird, right? Yeah, so when you write it, it looks more like that. So it kind of looks like you're starting to write katakana mu, and then you interrupt yourself and write a real katakana mu underneath, right? So it almost looks like you're showing two parallel katakana mus and one is behind the other, so you can't see all of it. But this one also means small or tiny. And then I think the reason fine silk is like tiny and small is because, have you ever seen silk thread? It is really, really fine, right? So tiny and small combined, fine silk. Makes a certain amount of logic, right? This is always an interesting one to me. Not bow, but bow. It's one of those words where you can't tell in English which one they mean, right? But look at the shape of it and think, bow and arrow.
Oh, I thought they meant like hair bow.
Oh, okay, no, bow as in archery.
Oh, that makes more sense.
Yeah, look at the shape of it. Doesn't it look like a compound bow or something, one of the complicated, more advanced bows? So if, you know, it's a little stylized, of course, but, you know, when you write it by hand, it usually looks like that. So yeah, it's not exactly like a bow anymore, but you can see where it evolved from, right? Because, you know, ancient Chinese archers had bows like that, right? You know, this was the hand grip in here. And that's the bowstring. Draw it back like that and shoot your arrow, right? And you take down a deer and have venison for dinner. Or take down a Mongol soldier if you're fighting a war, right? So that's bow, as in bow and arrow. And this is a component of a surprising number of characters. You might think, oh, what's that got to do with modern life? But it's in a lot of different characters, including ones for things like strength, which makes a certain amount of sense, right? Not power, but strength as in, you know, physical strength. What about this one? Heart. And again, it doesn't look a whole lot like it, but ancient Chinese people actually had a better idea of what a heart's actual shape was than ancient Europeans, because they didn't have any like laws against looking at corpses. So Chinese doctors were allowed to open up corpses and do autopsies and stuff and try to figure out how the body worked, whereas in medieval Christian world, that was forbidden. So Chinese doctors for a long while were more advanced than Western doctors because they were allowed to study how the body worked. So this originated as a fairly, not perfectly accurate, but fairly accurate drawing of what a heart actually looked like, and then it got very stylized apparently, because this doesn't look anything like one. But you can at least see that they've still got the 4 chambers, right? You know, you've got kind of the 2 bottom chambers and the 2 upper chambers of the heart there. There's not a whole lot else left of it, the original drawing though. But the original drawing, I've seen it, and it did kind of give a sort of impressionistic look of a heart with the shape of it and some arteries coming out and stuff. So, what about this guy? Anybody? We're getting back into ancient wartime again. Battle axe.
Oh, that's it. Help.
Yeah. And again, I don't exactly see a battle axe in that, but that's what they say it is. And again, it might seem weird, like what does that have to do with modern life? But again, it's a component of a number of characters. Not necessarily characters that seem to have anything to do with war either. Sometimes it's just there and you're like, where did that come from? Maybe it was relevant to a much older Chinese character that was a homophone and they borrowed it, you know? So we don't always know why some of these components are in there. Hand, yep, and this one did really evolve from a very simple drawing of a hand. And the fingers just got into weird positions after a while.
Like a stick hand.
Yeah, it's like a stick figure hand, okay. That one, of course, is sun, and again, these points don't really stick down that way when you're writing it normally. This one is moon, and these should come down like that, and this one should have a hook. So this one is tree. And again, it's very stylized, but you can kind of see where those used to be the roots and these used to be the branches. That's the trunk. But again, it got very stylized. And apparently it's got a very deep root system. Water. And this one evolved from basically that. 3 squiggles to indicate running water, like in a stream.
That kind of looks like Kawa from
Yes, and actually this original symbol evolved into 2 different symbols. This one to mean water, and this one to mean river. And both came from that original look. This one, they kind of straightened out the middle line, and then they left the other 2 a little bit squiggly, but changed their shapes. This one, they just did 3 lines. But both of them came from that same origin, because how do you draw a picture of water? It's not easy. Okay. This one's fire, and this one is a little bit easier, I think, to picture, because you can kind of see like a little teepee of sticks and flames coming off of this teepee of sticks. That's where that one came from. Okay, this one, of course, is rice field. And again, those aren't supposed to stick down that far when you write it by hand. Same thing with this one, I. And I believe this one started out being written kind of sideways, and it just over time. So
like I?
Yeah, like I, like the thing you see with it. Started out more like that, and it just tilted over time and straightened out and squared off. This one means to show. I'm not quite sure how this one evolved, but you can see ni, two, right? And you can see small. But if you're showing something, I don't know, maybe this is like the supports of a stage, and this is the stage, and you're showing something on the stage, you know, like a performance or something. I'm not sure how this came about, but that's one way to picture it at least. Yeah.
So it's more like the noun of a show?
No,
instead of
it's
like
more
a
like
verb
to show someone. It's usually shumesu, to show, to demonstrate. But I just imagine that maybe the way it evolved was from a picture of a platform from which you might show something. You know, because remember, Chinese evolved from pictures of concrete objects first, and then they had to find ways to demonstrate the abstract concepts. And very often what they did was they took a concrete object that related to that abstract concept in some way and borrowed that word and modified it in some way to indicate the more abstract meaning. So like the ancient character for righteousness or politeness or doing things the way they're properly supposed to be done evolved from what was actually an image of a ritual vessel from ancient Chinese religion. And they took that ritual vessel and they had a drawing of it that meant that vessel, but then later that same character came to mean ritual as a concept, and by extension, doing the right and proper thing the way you're supposed to according to Confucianism. And in modern Japanese, the evolution of the character now means politeness and bowing. Interesting, huh?
Fine silk.
Fine silk, yay, found it.
Ear here.
Yes, ear, and yeah, this side. It's right ear, because that's the side of your cheek, and there's your ear sticking out from your face, from your head. Interesting, huh? And then there's a different symbol that means left ear, because it goes the other way. That one's a left ear, and this is a right ear. Wild, huh?
Does that mean only right ear, or is it just
Well,
ear?
it's usually just ear in general, but sometimes they'll specify it as right ear versus left ear. But this one shows up in words like listen in Japanese, makes sense, right? And it's actually also just mimi, the physical ear, is this kanji also. Okay. Any ideas? Clothing. And this one might seem really weird and off the wall for clothing until you see, let's see if I can draw this. Ancient Chinese style garment. Wrap garments were the norm. You can kind of see it a little bit, right? You can see where it evolved from something sort of like that. Ancient Chinese and Japanese garments were worn with wrap. The very early ones were all tied on. Japanese kimono never gave that up. To this day, there's no fasteners on a kimono. It's all ties. You wrap a string around your waist and tie it in place. And then you wrap the next layer and tie it in place. Wrap the next layer, tie it in place. If you ever get a chance to dress up in kimono, you will feel like you've got 20 things wrapped around your middle. Guys have fewer, but they're just not as elaborate. But Chinese, what we think of in modern day as Chinese clothes is really Manchurian. It's a northern Chinese subgroup, an ethnicity from northern China that does, the high mandarin collars and the frog clasp buttons that are all those elaborate little twisty things, and then the button that's like a loop that goes over a ball. That's all Manchurian style, but ancient Chinese styles from before that were more, like a wrapped blouse and a wrapped skirt for women and a wrapped robe that went down to the ankles or the toes for men.
Foot.
Yes, foot. Ankle bone, foot bones, heel bone. It's not exactly an accurate skeleton, but you can kind of see it a little bit, right? Your anatomy professor would not approve, but you can kind of see a vaguely foot-shaped thing there, right? Okay. Money! And here you have a person radical as the roof, right? That's the roof. Looks like a typical ancient Chinese or Japanese architecture roof, right? And then underneath, this could be your collection of gold bars all in a big stack.
Isn't this a kanji for bank too?
No, the kanji for bank includes this as a component, but it's not the whole thing.
So,
This is the kanji for okane, money. It's the kanji for kin, gold. And it's in compounds like kingyo, gold fish. It's literally gold fish. But it's also in compounds that have to do with metal. So a lot of the kanjis, the various kanji for different kinds of metal, most of them have this as a radical, a side component, where they write it kind of sideways like that. And then there's something else on the other side, like that. Okay, so silver has this on one side, iron has this on one side, I think steel has it. There are very, very many of the metals have this as a component. Gate or door. Kind of looks like a gate or a door, right? Some people think it looks like saloon doors from the Old West.
that's true.
Yeah. The empty space in the bottom half of the middle here often gets filled in with something that means something. So if it's not an actual door, very often what's down here will be the meaning component and the door is just a homophone. So for example, put ear in here, it means to listen. Yeah, you put mouth in here and it means to ask a question or to have a question. You put day in here and it means a duration of time or between two things. You put, let me think. Oh yeah, you put a symbol that means open inside here. It looks like a torii gate, the Japanese Shinto shrine entrance. That symbol, you put that in here, and it means open. You put a different symbol in there, and it means close. There are lots of useful words that use this component. This is like one of my favorites because there are a whole bunch of them, and they are all sort of logical. The piece that's inside is like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Short.
It's supposed to be the bird.
Yeah, short-tailed bird. I don't see a bird there. Do you?
No, maybe the other thing is our short bird. The
Yeah.
tail.
Yeah. Or I don't know. Some people think that this looks like the crest, on this bird's head.
Don't they use that like with the days of the week? Like
Yep, there it is.
Yeah.
So
Why did they put a bird?
I'm not sure why bird is in there. Honestly, I think it was probably a phonetic component, but I have no earthly idea.
What about the other two above it?
Those look like katakana yo, don't
Yeah.
they? They're also sometimes, they're sort of a modified version of what looks like feathers,
Oh, okay.
but,
So sun, is it because like the birds sing in the morning?
maybe that's got something to do with it. But the way I remember it is because in Japanese, this is pronounced yo. It's a long oo sound.
Yeah.
So, and that's like yo-yo, right? So it's like extend the yo instead of saying it twice as a mnemonic. And then I just have to remember sun, yo-yo, short-tailed bird. But it's certainly a lot easier to remember those few components rather than trying to memorize all of these individual lines. That's like a 16-stroke character. You can choose to try to memorize it as 16 separate random lines, or you can remember 3 basic components: sun, yo-yo, short-tailed bird. It's a little easier that way, don't you think? So if you go ahead and memorize short-tailed bird ahead of time, then when we get to chapter 4 and have to learn that kanji, it won't be so horrible.
Rain.
Rain. Kind of looks like rain, right? Yeah, raindrops. And I think this maybe originally represented the big black cloud. And the stronger lines maybe represent heavier parts of the rainfall. These are individual droplets. I think the original drawing might have just shown like straight lines and dotted lines to indicate heavy rain and lighter rain falling from this being the cloud. To eat. And again, I don't see a person eating when I look at this, but maybe that's the roof of the restaurant or something. And maybe that's, I don't know, the face of the person, and that's like the hand with chopsticks shoving food in their face. I don't know the origins of how this one evolved. I have a feeling that what I just described has nothing whatsoever to do with it.
But it helps you remember.
But if it helps you remember, right, you know, there are mnemonics based on actual historical evolution of characters, and then there are mnemonics that are just based on, well, it kind of looks like that to me. So you can use whatever works for you. And then, of course, our final one was horse, which we talked about, that it doesn't really look that much like a horse anymore, but it did evolve from a picture of a horse, which is better at least than this one, because eat, I do not think this evolved from a picture of a person eating, but who knows what it really evolved from, I'm not sure. Any questions about any of these guys? Okay, and you'll notice that I was not able to print radical standalone pieces like this version of pan or this person of person, because the computer doesn't know how to print that by itself unless you're calling it a katakana e. So, any questions about radicals in general, these radicals in particular? These are not all the radicals, by the way. There are 100 and something radicals. And that's just radicals. Components are a separate thing. So let me just briefly touch on that. So these count as both radicals and components. Sometimes they're standalone characters, sometimes they're a component of a larger character. The way, you know, sun is a component of this, short-tailed bird is also a component of this. Radical actually means the part that is indicating meaning. So on yo, for example, sun would be the radical. But there are other components that are recognizable as, oh yeah, I've seen that before, I've learned that before, right? Most characters have both. So for example, that would be the radical on motsu, to carry, to hold. The other half of it is soil and inch, right? Which, as a standalone character, Soil plus inch means otera, temple. But depending on what radical you put there, you can combine it other ways to make, for example, ji, time, motsu, to carry, matsu, to wait, and on and on and on. There are probably a dozen different characters that have temple as a component, but different radicals. The radicals are very often the left-hand side on a character that's shaped left to right, like these are. This would be considered a top to bottom character if it's a standalone one. There are a number of characters that are top to bottom, like otoko, for example, top to bottom. Okaru or fun is also a top to bottom character. So there are some that are side to side, there are some that are top to bottom in terms of their shape and their stroke order. Generally speaking, top to bottom and left to right is the most common stroke order. Downward diagonal strokes usually go this way. Some of these strokes are that way, but if there's a hook, very often it comes up from the bottom, like in shi. So stroke order is something that is hard to pin down sometimes, but the rules of thumb are generally top before bottom, left before right, center before two symmetrical sides. So for example, small, you do center first, then the left, then the right. Naka, you do the mouth first and then the line through it. I think there's some other stroke order rules. Those are some of the main ones. Center before two. If you've got an enclosure with something in it, the norm is open the door, let your friends in, then close the door. That's how it was explained to me. So opening the door means you're drawing the first part of the enclosure. The left and then top and right are usually one piece. And then you're filling in whatever goes in the center, and then you close the door last, which is the bottom line. So that's normal stroke order for all the enclosure characters. The exception being ones where, like with this, the line cuts all the way through, and very often the line that cuts all the way through is last. So, like that. I think that's about it. Any questions? So, is kanji a little bit less intimidating now that you know there are some rules involved? It's not just random lines, really. They have stories behind them, they have history behind them, but there's also a certain amount of logic. Maybe not the logic you're used to, coming from English, but there is some rhyme and reason to it. It's not just total randomness. And you've got, components. So for example, you take the radical version of to eat. This is the side piece version of to eat. And you add this, you get drink. You take the same piece, and you add this instead, you get gohan, rice, meal. So there's logic to it, right? A lot of words that have to do with ingesting nutrition have this kanji in them. Okay? So it's not just total randomness. Okay. So let's go ahead and look at our kanji for this lesson. I've got flashcards for that too. So, let me go ahead and find the numbers first. Okay, so this one is ichi, one, and it's got to be the easiest kanji ever, right? Ichi, and then the other two easiest ones ever are ni and san, right? Super logical, not difficult to learn, right? So ichi, ni, san, you don't have a problem with. Yon is kind of a rectangle, so it kind of fits, right? Four-sided figure. Yon. Go. Now we're starting to get a little bit more abstract, right? Go. Okay. Roku kind of reminds me of, like, wasn't it one of the cell phone companies or something that had a little stick figure that kind of looked like this? Singular, yeah. Didn't they used to have a some funny?
Yeah.
So singular, 6, roku. Maybe that's a way to remember it. Okay. Nana or shichi, right? Kind of looks like a European 7 upside down. Yes? Okay, so that's nana or shichi. Hachi looks like a katakana ha. It also looks like the top half of that fun, like it just got chopped. It kind of sounds like a karate chop, hachi, or hatchet, right? So hachi, and it does look like katakana ha also. Usually when people write katakana ha, they write it pretty even. Kanji for hachi, usually it's a little bit more of a lopsided volcano. The right-hand line is supposed to be a tad longer and overshadow the other one a little bit. Doesn't show in this particular font. But when people handwrite it, usually there's a slight difference between this ha and this hachi. Okay, and then of course Q kind of looks like what? Maru, yeah, it looks like maru without the extra slash. It also looks a little bit like katakana ka, but it curves out the other way instead of curving under, right? So this is Q. And then Ju. And my high school students always thought that was horribly ironic and hilarious because of the pronunciation, and it's a cross, Jew.
Oh.
So my high school kids used to think that was really funny. But it'll help you keep it in your head, right?
Yeah.
And it's, again, a pretty simple character. This one, I believe, evolved from a picture of 10 sticks tied together with a string, because 10 is an easy, like, round number to work with. If you're counting things, you count in tens, right? 10, 20, 30, 40. Chinese people like that too. I think it has something to do with having 10 fingers. It just comes naturally to the human brain to count in tens. And so this evolved from a picture of the 10 little sticks tied together with a string as being one bundle. And then over time it simplified down to just one line to represent the 10 sticks and one line to represent the rope tying them together. That's where that came from. Okay, so I wanted to go through some of these just a little bit in order, but combines to make hapyaku, right? Shichiji, there's our G, remember? And then rokyaku, right? Hyakuman, right? And notice that man and Q are not the same. Okay, a lot of people get them confused. So let's deal with that right now, actually. So Q, you start out like you're writing like that, okay? Man, you've got that top line, you've got that piece, and then you've got that piece. Okay? So you've got Q, you've got man, and this is katakana ka for contrast. Okay? So in terms of stroke order, it's 1, 2 for Q. Okay? And man is 1, 2, 3. Okay? And then chikara, power, or ka, either one is 1, 2, like that. So they're not even the same order as each other. Okay? Does that help a little bit? Hopefully that'll help to differentiate, because this is hyakuman and this is kuji, right? And people often get those confused for some reason. Yoji, yeah. Sanji, Niji, Ichiji, Sen, yes. Okay, this is pronounced sen when it's by itself. If the line is more curved, you get katakana chi. Also, if this is part of a name like Chihiro, this gets pronounced chi when it's part of, like, the city name Chitose. It's this chi. The girl's name Chihiro. It's this chi. How many people have watched the movie Spirited Away? Okay. This is why when the witch takes away the other 3 characters from her name changes from Chihiro to Sen. This is the only kanji that the witch left her. So it changed from Chi as part of the name Chihiro to Sen. That's why her name changes that way in the movie. Juji, yeah. Sambyaku. Juma, right? Hyaku-en, right? There's your en kanji. Everybody? See, seen this one before? Like maybe even on the price tag that was stuck in your book? Hasen, right? Hachiji. Kuji. Rokuji. Hyaku. Ichiman and Sanzen. Okay. Any questions about recognizing the kanji for this lesson? Okay. Now, when you look at your vocab list for this lesson, there's no more romaji. Everybody notice that? Okay. And there's a column there where instead of the romaji, where the romaji would have been, there's a column there that has what? Kanji. Are you responsible for all those kanji? No. Okay, the kanji that are required for this lesson are the kanji we just went through. Okay? The kanji that are shown in your vocab list are more in the nature of FYI. Okay? If you want to start learning those, certainly be my guest. And if you feel comfortable writing some of them on your test even, feel free. But you're not required to know those.
I thought we were.
Okay. That's why I like to say it early on, because people start panicking when they get to this chapter and they see a bazillion kanji. You are responsible for the kanji in your chapter, okay? Which,
Page 299.
page 299. Yes, page 299. I had it bookmarked. So these kanji, there are, what, 10 of them? 15 of them? Yeah, 15. These 15 kanji are the ones that you will be tested on, the ones that you're expected to be able to read and write by the end of this lesson. You're expected to be able to use them in context. The compounds that you're expected to be able to read and write and manage are the ones that are highlighted in gray. Okay? If it's not in gray, if it's separate, like ropun, that's extra information that you might like to know, but you're not yet responsible for those readings. When we get to the kanji for fun, then you'll be responsible for that combination. But since fun is not one of the kanji we're studying yet, you're not yet responsible for that one. Okay? These will be good to go back and revisit when we do get some of these other kanji, because you'll want them at that point. Make sense? But for now, the kanji that are gray and the readings that are gray are the ones that you're responsible for. The others are FYI, okay? Same thing in the new lesson when I put my bookmark in the right spot. Excuse me, that might be my kids calling from Kenya. No. I'll call them back later. Okay. So all of these kanji for eiga and ongaku and zashi and asagohan and osake and ocha, you do not have to know all of those yet. Okay, I do want you to know the vocabulary, but it's okay to write it in hiragana for now. Okay? If you want to start getting used to recognizing those kanji when you see them, that's great. But if you're feeling overwhelmed and you feel like just learning the hiragana for those vocabulary is going to be plenty, that's okay. Okay? There's enough information in this book for many years to come yet, because you could go back later when you know these vocabulary really well and learn these kanji. Okay? If you're ready for it and you want to challenge yourself, feel free, but you don't have to. Okay? So, since there's no romaji anymore in the book, I don't have a PowerPoint for the vocabulary for this lesson. I don't have the flashcards printed off, but I want us to go ahead and do a read-through and pronunciation practice of these characters, of these vocabulary words, rather. So if you don't have your book with you, can you look with somebody? Okay? Can you look on with someone? Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to play around with a sort of different way of reading. So what we're going to do is I'm going to say it in Japanese. I want you to tell me the English. We're going to do Japanese, English, Japanese, English, Japanese, English. Then I'm going to say the English and you're going to do the Japanese. Okay, and we're going to do that for each vocabulary word so that everybody gets a chance to both hear the correct pronunciation and say the correct pronunciation and associate it with the English meaning. Okay, so we're going to try that with the whole list. So it's going to go like this. Eiga, movie. Eiga, movie. Eiga, movie.
Eiga.
Movie.
Eiga.
Movie.
Eiga.
Good. Ongaku.
Music.
Ongaku.
Music.
Ongaku.
Music.
Music.
Ongaku.
Music.
Ongaku.
Music.
Ongaku.
Zashi.
Pictures.
Zashi.
Magazine.
Zashi.
Magazine.
Magazine.
Zashi.
Magazine.
Zashi.
Magazine.
Zashi.
Sports.
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 sports,
スポーツ
sports,
スポーツ
sports,
スポーツ
sports,
スポーツ
sports,
デート
date,
デート
date,
デート
date,
デート
date,
デート
date,
デート
date,
テニス
tennis,
テニス
tennis,
テニス
tennis,
テニス
tennis,
テニス
tennis,
テニス
tennis,
テレビ
TV,
テレビ
TV,
テレビ
TV,
TV
television,
TV
television,
TV
television,
アイスクリーム
ice cream,
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 朝ごはん
breakfast,
朝ごはん
breakfast,
朝ごはん
breakfast,
breakfast
asagohan,
breakfast
asagohan,
breakfast
asagohan,
お酒
alcohol,
お酒
alcohol,
お酒
alcohol,
アルコホール
osake,
アルコホール
osake,
酒
osake,
はいお茶
green tea,
お茶
green tea,
お茶
green tea,
グリーンティー
ocha,
グリーンティー
ocha,
グリーンティー
ocha,
コーヒー
coffee,
コーヒー
coffee,
コーヒ
coffee,
ーコーヒ
coffee,
ーコーヒー
coffee,
コーヒ
coffee,
ー晩ごはん
dinner,
晩ごはん
dinner,
晩ごはん
dinner,
ディナー
bangohan,
ディナー
bangohan,
ディナー
bangohan,
ハンバーガ
hamburger,
ーハンバーガー
hamburger,
ハンバーガー
hamburger,
ハンバーガー
hamburger,
ハンバーガー
hamburger,
ハンバーガー
hamburger,
昼ごはん
lunch,
昼ごはん
lunch,
昼ごはん
lunch,
ランチ
hirugohan,
ランチ
hirugohan,
ランチ
hirugohan,
OK 水
water,
水
water,
水
water,
water
mizu,
water
mizu,
water
mizu,
家
home,
家
home,
家
home,
home
ie,
house
ie,
home
ie,
うち
home,
うち
home,
うち
home,
home
uchi,
house
uchi,
my place
uchi,
学校
school,
学校
school,
学校
school,
school
gakko,
school
gakko,
school
gakko,
朝
morning,
朝
morning,
朝
morning,
morning
asa,
morning
asa,
morning
asa,
明日
tomorrow,
明日
tomorrow,
明日
tomorrow,
tomorrow
asha,
tomorrow
asha,
tomorrow
asha,
いつ
when,
いつ
when,
いつ
when,
when
itsu,
when
itsu,
when
itsu,
今日
today,
今日
today,
今日
today,
today
kyo,
today
kyo,
today
kyo,
ごろ
about,
ごろ
at about,
ごろ
at about,
at about
goro,
at about
goro,
at about
goro,
今晩
tonight,
今晩
tonight,
今晩
tonight,
tonight
konban,
tonight
konban,
tonight
konban,
週末
weekend,
週末
weekend,
週末
weekend,
weekend
shumatsu,
weekend
shumatsu,
weekend
shumatsu,
土曜日
Saturday,
土曜日
Saturday,
土曜日
Saturday,
Saturday
doyobi,
Saturday
doyobi,
Saturday
doyobi,
日曜日
Sunday,
日曜日
Sunday,
日曜日
Sunday,
Sunday
nichiyobi,
Sunday
nichiyobi,
Sunday
nichiyobi,
毎日
every day,
毎日
every day,
毎日
every day,
every day
mainichi,
every day
mainichi,
every day
mainichi,
毎晩
every night,
毎晩
every night,
毎晩
every night,
every night
maiban,
every night
maiban,
every night
maiban,
行く
to go,
行く
to go,
行く
to go,
to go
iku,
to go
iku,
to go
iku,
帰る
to go back,
帰る
to go back,
帰る
to go back,
to go back
kaeru,
to return
kaeru,
to go back
kaeru,
聞く
to hear,
聞く
to listen,
聞く
to listen,
to listen
kiku,
to hear
kiku,
to listen
kiku,
飲む
to drink,
飲む
to drink,
飲む
to drink,
to drink
nomu,
to drink
nomu,
to drink
nomu,
話す
to speak,
話す
to speak,
話す
to speak,
to speak
hanasu,
to talk
hanasu,
to speak
hanasu,
読む
to read,
to 読む
to read,
読む
to read,
to read
yomu,
to read
yomu,
to read
yomu,
起きる
to get up,
起きる
to get up,
起きる
to get up,
to get up
okiru,
to get up
okiru,
to get up
okiru,
食べる
to eat,
食べる
to eat,
食べる
to eat,
to eat
taberu,
to eat
taberu,
to eat
taberu,
寝る
to sleep,
miru,
to see,
miru,
to see,
miru,
to see,
to see,
miru,
to look,
miru,
to watch.
miru,
Kuru,
to come,
kuru,
to come,
kuru,
to come,
come,
kuru,
to come,
kuru,
to come.
kuru,
Suru,
to do,
suru,
to do,
suru,
to do,
to do,
to do,
to do,
suru,
to do.
suru,
Benkyou suru,
to study,
benkyou suru,
to study,
benkyou suru,
to study,
to study,
benkyou suru,
to study,
benkyou suru,
to study.
benkyou suru,
E,
good,
E,
good,
E,
good,
good,
e,
good,
e,
good.
e,
Hayai,
early,
hayai,
early,
hayai,
early,
early,
hayai,
early,
hayai,
early.
hayai,
Amari,
not much,
amari,
not much,
amari.
not much,
Not much,
not much,
not much,
amari,
not much.
amari,
Zen zen,
not at all,
zen zen,
not at all,
zen zen.
not at all,
Not at all,
zen zen,
not at all,
zen zen,
not at all.
zen zen,
Tai te,
usually,
tai te,
usually,
tai te.
usually,
Usually,
taite,
usually,
taite,
usually.
taite,
Chotto,
a little,
chotto,
a little,
chotto.
a little,
A little,
chotto,
a little,
chotto,
a little.
chotto,
Tokidoki,
sometimes,
tokidoki,
sometimes,
tokidoki.
sometimes,
Sometimes,
tokidoki,
sometimes,
tokidoki,
sometimes.
tokidoki,
Yoku,
often,
yoku,
often,
yoku.
often,
Often,
yoku,
much,
yoku,
often.
yoku,
そうですね。
that's right,
そうですね。
that's right,
そうですね。
that's right,
That's right.
そうですね、
Let me see.
そうですね、
That's right.
そうですね、
でも、
but,
でも、
but,
でも、
but,
but,
でも、
but,
でも、
but.
でも、
どうですか
how about,
どうですか
how else,
どうですか
how about,
How about?
どうですか、
How is?
どうですか、
How about?
どうですか、
Okay. I want you to notice some things to help you. This might feel like a lot of vocabulary, but notice my means every, and the nichi is the same as in nichi yobi, right? The ban is the same in my ban and also ban gohan, okay, and konban, right? Ban means night in all those different compounds, right? This night, konban, and every night, my ban, and ban gohan, night meal, right? Asa is morning, asa gohan, morning meal, breakfast. Hiru means noon, hiru gohan, noon meal. Make sense? So some of these compounds make a lot more sense when you know the pieces, right? So look for those kinds of commonalities that'll help you memorize the vocabulary more easily. Also, we've got a little bit of time. We're going to talk very quickly about verbs, okay? And we'll talk more about them next time. Also, if you look in the YouTube channel, how many people have been looking at the recordings of our classes and other classes on YouTube? The link is on Canvas. So if you want to hear back any of what we practiced today, or if you want to hear more information about a particular topic, look for on my YouTube channel. Find the link in Canvas and look on my YouTube channel for different lessons about different chapters that might help you. Okay, so in particular you might want to look at anything that says it's for lesson 3, especially if it says that it's talking about grammar, because we're going to talk more about that on Thursday, but for now we've got a few minutes. I'm going to just start briefly. So 3 kinds of verbs in Japanese: u, ru, and irregular. Okay? Irregulars are the smallest group, so I'm going to start with them. Okay? It basically breaks down to suru and huru and variations thereof. That's it. Okay? So for example, benkyou suru conjugates just like suru. Okay? The benkyo part doesn't change in any way. Benkyo suru. Okay? So, who has already read some of the chapter? Who knows what the heck this form is? This form, suru and kuru, is called the dictionary form. Why is it called that? Because if you look up a verb in Japanese in the dictionary, guess what you're going to find? This form. Okay, so you need to know this form for that reason and for other reasons too, like the fact that this is also casual present tense. Okay, when we get into casual speech in second semester, you're going to need this. Okay, so suru, when you want to change it to the polite present tense form, suru doesn't have a real predictable pattern. It changes to shimasu. Okay? Kuru changes to kimasu. Okay? We're going to come back to that in a minute because there's a way in which these two irregulars sort of combine the rules for both u and ru verbs. Okay? So we're going to color code this a little bit. Okay, so ru verbs. Examples in your textbook include, sorry, I started to write the kanji, but you're not doing that one yet. Taberu, and what else? Miru, and okiru, and neru. Is that all the ru verbs in your book? Yes, those four. And did everybody notice that they very nicely categorize them by type of verb in your vocab list? It's good to memorize what kind of verb each one is because it's going to help you remember which rule to follow for conjugating it. So, taberu, miru, okiru, neru are all ru verbs. Those are the dictionary forms of the ru verbs. Okay? And the way you get the simple present polite forms of ru verbs is you just drop the ru and add mas. Okay, so taberu changes to tabe mas, right? Miru changes to mimasu. Okay, okiru changes to okimasu, and neru changes to nemasu. Okay? Let's see. So, u verbs. Slightly more complicated, but still not terrible. Okay? So, let's list the u verbs they give you. They give you iku, right? And let's see, yomu, and nomu, and let's see, kiku, and what else? Hanasu, and kaeru. Any others? Was that it? 1,2,3,4,5,6. 1,2,3,4,5,6. Yeah, I think I got them all. Okay, so notice these are called u verbs because what? They all end in u, but different consonants, right? The ru verbs always end in ru, right? Hi. Kairu is in disguise. It's pretending like it's a ru verb, but it's really an u verb. Okay? Luckily, there aren't too many of those. But you do have to memorize that this is a ru verb. Okay? And here's my trick for how you make sure that you know that it's a ru verb. Memorize the set, the dictionary form, and the mas form together. So what's the rule for u verbs? Remember, ru verbs was just drop the ru and add mas instead, right? U verbs, you change the u to e and then add mas. Okay, so the u changes to e, but it keeps the consonant sound. So within the hiragana chart, think about just going up one in the hiragana chart. So if it had ku before, it changes to ki, right? So iku changes to ikimasu, right? Yomu will change to yomimasu, right? Nomu changes to no mi masu. Kiku, ki, kimasu. Hanasu, hanashimasu. And then kaeru, kaerimasu. So see how all of them just changed from the u to the e, but they kept their consonant sound. Make sense? One of the reasons I'm not crazy about the u verb term for these verbs is just because it's a little hard to hear whether I'm saying u or ru sometimes, right? Another term that you will find in some textbooks for these same verbs is go-dan verbs. It's another term for these same class of verbs. Go-dan, go meaning 5, dan meaning levels. If anybody's ever done martial arts, you may have heard of like go-dan black belt, 5th degree black belt, or ichidan black belt, 1st degree black belt, that kind of term. They use it for that too. But in Japanese, it goes adan, idan, udan, edan, odan. Adan is akasatana hamayara wa n, right? Idan is iki, shi, like that, okay? So the reason they call these verbs go-dan verbs is because eventually, when we get advanced enough, there will be conjugations coming off of this that go all the way up and down the 5 dan. So like, for example, using ikimasu, iku is u, right? Ikimasu, ikanai, ikeba, iko. They use all 5 eventually. Some of those we don't get to until the green book. But they get there eventually. Do you see what I'm talking about? So that's why they sometimes call these go-dan verbs. But for now, they call them u verbs. We'll live with that. But I just want you to notice, keeps the same consonant, just changes from u to e, right? Now, I said we would come back to the irregulars. Do you notice they kind of combine both sets of rules? They drop the u, they drop the ru rather, just like these guys. And then the letter before the ru, they change the consonant from u to e. Kind of a weird combination of the 2 other sets of rules, right? But these are called irregulars because although these 2 kind of follow the same pattern for this part, later on there will be other places where they don't seem to follow even the same pattern as each other. So they're truly irregulars in some sense. Okay, so these are the weird ones. These are the 2 oddballs. Thank God there's only 2 of them, unlike English, which has a bazillion irregular verbs, right? And half of them don't even share a pattern with each other. Okay, but ru verbs all share the same pattern. Drop the ru, add mas. U verbs all share their pattern. Drop the u, change it to e, but with the same consonant. Make sense? Okay. And later we'll get into some that actually don't have a consonant there. For example, au. And it actually changes to aimas. So it still follows the same pattern, even if there's no consonant there to change. It still goes up and down that one column that you picked. Make sense? Okay. So, any questions about verbs? Okay. We're done for tonight, but I want you to, for today rather, but I want you to work on the first few exercises exercises conjugating the verbs into mas and masen. Masen is just the negative, okay? Tabemas, I will eat or I eat. Tabemasen, I won't eat or I don't eat. Make sense? Okay.
So with the verbs, it would be like translated like from iku to ikimasen.
Right, exactly. And if it's a regular suru, shimas, shimasen.
Okay.
So the masu and masen is consistent across all the verbs. Once you can get from dictionary form to mas form, you're home free for masu, masen, and then the next chapter, mashta, masen, deshta. They all come off of that same basic mas form. So mas forms are easy. That's one of the reasons this textbook teaches them first. Dictionary form conjugations for short form casual verbs are more complicated. These are the neutral polites. That means that it's appropriate to use this with a total stranger in the train station who you're asking for help finding the bathroom. You know? So you can say this stuff politely to somebody and not worry that you're offending somebody. Okay? Second semester we get into casual speech where we can talk to, say, a host family or a close friend in Japan. But they start with the assumption that first you need to be able to not offend strangers. So,
Sounds like a good place to start.
yeah, I thought so. And it's easier to conjugate, so it gives people less of a panic attack. Okay, so ganbatte. So work on those first few exercises, and we will play around with actually applying verbs and sentences on Thursday.
Easier for next class or the one after that.
Okay.
For 4th of July. So is there anything that you suggest that I do like ahead of
Yes.
time?
Okay. A couple of things you can do. First of all, let me turn this off real quick.